almost wind up the history up to 1000 Common Era. The topic today is Rise of the Small Kingdoms. That itself suggests that when the central power is split up in different small kingdoms with different capitals far away from each other, and there is a rivalry between them, and those kingdoms are also dependent on the tribes under uh, each kingdom. So it is a very fluid situation where the one kingdom, Paramars, overtake the area of Pratiharas, and then Pratiharas take it back and forth. So we'll show it with the help of the maps. So after this slide, we are done as far as the history up to 1000 Common Era is concerned. And then we will talk about the contributions of, uh, uh, of India to the world of ideas and to the civilization of mankind. So it will be split up in a few chapters. And after that, we will touch about 5 or 6 lessons about the history of southern India, which normally is ignored as if nothing happened there. It was all a plateau or mountains and peninsula, and nothing was happening. As a matter of fact, a lot was happening simultaneously. Since we cannot do the simultaneous history of parallel history, it becomes difficult. So I divided it into first the sections on northern India. Then I did the contributions to mankind and civilizational landmarks. And the third will be uh, history of southern India. So, so what is the theme and thrust today? We witnessed several upheavals from 7th century onwards, even a little earlier than that. Some earlier invaders came and they assimilated, absorbed the culture of India, and it was just like the change of a ruler, and the fabric of society or cultural ethos did not change at all. Then this time we are having triangular struggle of control. There are Palas from Bengal, there are Pratiharas from the southwest, and then Chindelas in between the two, and the whole lot of other kingdoms, especially from the across the Vindhyachal mountain, Andhra Pradesh, Rashtrakutas. So still there were great achievements in the field of literature, medicine, architecture, and even social awakening. Because when there is acculturation between communities which believe in converting the subjugated person, then when that person comes back, the issues of reunification or absorbing the person back raises some kind of challenges. And this kind of social awakening was necessary later on in 100 years back. This awakening was done by Arya Samaj also. So now there are domestic dangers to national security of Indian democracy, yeah, even today. So is it something new that India has never faced this challenge? It has. Then what's the problem? If the domestic dangers were always present to national security, whether it was a monarchy or a republic or a janpad, then what's the issue? Why were we not able to find out some kind of solution or some kind of fault line that we could avoid rupturing? So therefore, this is a modern time issue. This whole thing that is developing and culminating into subjugation of the country, first to the Muslim sultanates, and then to the British. So it is very relevant that we understand the fault lines. Now, shift of power base towards the southwest. And the reason for that is that once the Vardhans declined, about 7th century, 8th century, several new kingdoms came, and Magad lost its importance. It remained on the sideline, kind of. Even though it is technically the middle, it should have been more important as a core of the power base. Still, it shifted to places in Maharashtra, Bengal, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat. So all of these areas saw shift to of capital either to Kannauj or to Ujjain or to some other place, and Mongher. So where the Rajput kings ruled most of these kingdoms, they were called, they later on came to be known as Rajputana. I don't think Pratiharas and Paramars knew that word for that region, but the British later on called it Rajputana. So sources of Rajput history, it's very difficult to give the account, as I said, when the everything is happening and they are contemporaneous kingdoms. It's like writing the history of Italy, France, Germany as one narrative. That is not done, and that cannot be done unless they are under one ruler. And it wasn't so. So we are not writing the history of all of them together, Paramars, Gurjars, and everybody. We are splitting it in sessions, dynasty, session wise. Not session wise, I mean separate section. It will cover the historical accounts of Pratiharas, Paramaras, and Pala. And I'll also mention of the Gurjar. Gurjar is suddenly has become very important community who is asking for minority rights, even though they are tracing their origin from Patihara and Sri Ramchandra, Suryavanshi kings. So I don't understand how Gurjars are becoming disadvantaged, or when did they become disadvantaged. So you see, these kind of things are very important to notice where the fault line is. Now, this is one of the fault lines where somebody for some kind of community gain, and they are trying to link themselves to a historical past. If the historical past, you go deeper into that and study, then that is a very important part of the civilization. So when they became, disadvantaged or minority, everybody is a minority if you go by regions or by jati and clan, then everybody is a minority. So the sources of history, these are Muslim sources, Bildari and Suleiman. And Kalan mentioned in his book, he was he was a writer from Kashmir, and he mentions how from Pratiharas they asked for help from Kashmir. Then there are books like Harivansh Puran and Bappa Charitam, Bappa Bhattacharitam, Kumar Pal Charitam. This is another. They belong to the same dynasty of Pratiharas. Then there are inscriptions. So several of them, I just mentioned Jodhpur's inscription, Gwalior stone inscription, and just this small little quote, which Gwalior inscription describes about Nagabhatta. So this is the second king or third king of Pratihara dynasty. So, usually like the bards and the charvakas. These inscriptions also kind of glorify about whom they are writing. So, how many ports he seized, and where are those places, and he was a great warrior, and whole lot of it. Okay. Now, sketchy history. They trace themselves from Agnikul, which is a Suryavanshi. Harishchandra is believed to be the 6th century, and he was about around modern day Jodhpur. Much later, century and a half later, Nagabhat ruled from this time, almost 26 years, and he conquered Malwa. And I'll show you in the map where all of these places are, which way they were moving and which way they are trying to control. So it extended up to Bharuch in Gujarat. He also extended his control to east and south, and his capital was Avanti. Now we are far away from the center of the nave. So, and the power base. He repulsed the attacks by Arabs. Of course, there are many. And he also was fighting with Chalukyas from the south. So it was like a very murky kind of period. And internecine warfare was part of the whole thing. Pratiharas became the overlord of Maurya Chauhans, Gujarat. Later on, Chauhans became a much bigger kingdom going up to Delhi. So, and Kannauj bifurcated from Pratiharas. So the whole thing was, you see the map, it shows, overlapping, and now the boundary is this way, now the boundary is that way. So after Nagabhat won, Raja was another great ruler. And then next came King Meher Bhoj. And this Bhoj is uh, considered to be a very powerful imperial king. And he's confused with the Bhoj of Parmar. So this Meher Bhoj is not the one who was Parmar king. Bhoj seems to be like, a very popular kind of title or name. So the joint forces of Pratiharas and Chauhans, it became a mighty army. And even the Muslim chroniclers, they described that they are the great warriors, and they are very good in warfare, and they are the greatest enemies of uh, uh, Arabs and Islamic faith. So, and the Pratiharas are very rich, and of course, um, it, that area is full of minerals and other resources. And people confuse it with a small little part on the west, which is called Thar Desert. And they think entire Rajputana, right up to Delhi, and Vindhyachal is a desert. That is how the global history books describe it. And this I'm also pointing out that our job to revise history or correct the narrative is also that we should burst the commonly promoted myths. Even a year back or half a year back, Rahul Gandhi, of all persons, I mean, who is no authority on anything, went out of country and started saying that India was never a nation, not knowing the Hindi word for nation is Rashtra. And Rashtra is mentioned like millennia back. So uh, that is why it is important that we burst this myth. Even the Muslim chroniclers, they admit that these were very powerful and rich kingdoms. By the way, have you ever seen a robber and invader going to a poor man's cottage? Never. So, if India was a poor country and primitive, why would anybody go there? Suddenly, they are not the missionaries of civilization that they have to civilize India. It is for resources. And that game is going on even today. So if you see it on the wider landscape, like geoscape, then you see the same thing going on. Now it is the land resources, now it is the water resources, now it's the international water lanes, the shipping routes, whole kind of, it has a historic background. And the challenge before this generation, after going through this narrative, is how to bypass this and bring some kind of commonalities as the basis for humanity before it self-destruct itself. So now this is Gurjar Pratihar. Gurjar is the name of the region. So it is not a tribe, it has nothing to do with the people, cattle raising or ranchers or anything. It was just one of the places, Gurjars. People from there, they were called Gurjars. But they were not, they claim to be Pratiharas, but they are not. So these are different places, and it is pretty much a wide empire going all the way to Odisha, uh, Bengal, and Bihar, and then UP and Punjab. So pretty much you can see the outlines of the rivers, and that shows that it is the Indus River right here. And outside of that were the Arabs who had already encroached in this area, and Kashmir was independent. So now temple architecture, those people are very fond of. And I was amazed when I saw the um, hundreds of pictures of temples uh, taken by my son when he was visiting Rajasthan and down below up to Hampi. So these temples, some were Jain, Ocean City, a major religious center, and several other temples were added between that 300 years, and they were dedicated to all three faith traditions. The most famous of 18 temples, actually, they were, when I show the map, I cannot count how many they were. They don't look like 18, much more than that. So there Sun Temple, Kali Temple, Dilwara, Jain Temple, Khajuraho temples, Bhuteshwar, Bhojpur, all of these, Udaipur, one of the most famous architect, a marvel of architecture. So then in between the same time, about 9th century, somewhere or a little later, 10, 18 or something, Muhammad Ghazni came, earlier than that. He came from Ghazna in Afghanistan, what is now called, and he destroyed the Somnath temple. It was rebuilt by Nagabhat too. And by the way, Somnath was destroyed again and again and again. And the last time it was rebuilt was when India became sort of independent. During his rule, Kannauj became the center of Pratihara state. So from Avanti, now they moved to Kannauj. Peak of the power was the period between this. The next great king was King Meher Bhoja, and Bhoja faced resistance. Now the decline begins. From this peak, the decline begins. On the one side, there are Arabs on the west, On the other side, there are Palas of Bengal, and then there are Rashtrakutas and Chalukyas from the south. So the boundaries of the kingdom became very fluid, and the challenges were so many. The need for the times was unification and concentration of power at a certain base. This is Bateshwar temple. I mean, the intricacies of this, one marvels. I mean, the structure, the intricacies, the small lattice work, carving, it is amazing. And these are just pictures. And this is one of the ornate pillars of that temple, Udaipur. And this is Mayor Bhoj, the king. Pretty impressive coat. Okay. And this is a picture showing the temples during Paramars and Pratiharas and even Palas. See how many temples are there. It is amazing. At least I cannot come. Of course, there is a Konark temple, and then there is, of course, Somnath here, rebuilt, and Udaipur. And like that, it is littered with, and most of them are mutilated and uh, destroyed. Somewhere the arms are missing, somewhere the head is missing. And this is the destruction and vandalism done when barbaric and brutal attackers come, who just come to find the resources and loot and go back, in the process destroy. And on the name of God. All is happening on the name of that we are mandated by God Himself. I don't know when He did that or He descended in Arab to do that. Status of women. There are many writers who mentioned about the women. They were part of public life and the royal life as well. And they were not invisible behind the curtain or in a corridor. They were part of the whole show, participating in everything. Enjoyed singing, dancing, playing musical instrument. So most ladies wore ornaments, used cosmetics made with earth and rose water and sandalwood. These are being revived again after a lapse when the pharmaceutical companies relegated these basic herbs for beauticians to use. So many women from elitist classes, they use the services of hairdressers and facial care salon. Some of them had their personal beautician, and the Sanskrit name for that is Sarandri. It is also mentioned in Mahabharata. So it's not something new. That means for several millennia, a span of, I mean, several eras, this kind of thing existed in India. It's not a modern day concept. Some of the highlights of economic life, they use farmers for advance. They were using Persian wheel actually for getting the water and also for tilling the fields. Many different types of grains were grown. And the Arab writers mention coconut, mangoes, rice, lemon. I mean, this is just, it always was there, not that they were declining. It is just that the Arabs came and they described. Not that they were the first Pratiharas to start it. Workers were organized in guilds. They were organized even in Indus Valley time and Mahabharata time according to the occupations. This is, we explained, Varan Ashram. Varandhara. For example, there were separate guilds for gardeners, the potters, the blacksmiths, and the artisans. And in modern day, in many big cities, metropolitan cities, the house workers, maids and servants, they have their own union. And between 2 to 5 in the afternoon, they don't work. They attend union meetings or just take rest. What I'm saying is the concept of union, trade union, is not new for India. It's not a Western imported, exported to us. Interstate and foreign trade was carried out in central India. And Rajshekhar mentions the mobility, like if they were not stuck in one occupation. And that we know it is Valmiki was Chandal, he was considered Brahmin, and Vishwamitra was Kshatriya, he was considered Brahmrishi. So mobility was always there. I am mentioning it for the reason because my audience or the person who will be viewing these lessons, they are used to listening that they were rigid caste system. You see, a mold was constructed, everybody was funneled in, and they couldn't get out of that mold. So that's the reason I'm mentioning again and again. So several seats of learning, and they were there in Patliputra, now they were in Kannauj, in Patliputra, Ujjain, Nalanda, and many other places. So now comes the markings of Malwa. And going back to the map, or we'll go forward to the other map and show where the Pratiharas shrank and where the Paramars of Malwa became dominant. In other words, Mewar and Udaipur became central part of Parmar kings. And periphery remained still with the Pratiharas, and I'll show you that. So they established themselves as rulers, and their capital was Dara. Dara literally means the blade of the sword. And they say that it started in 8th century by Upendra. And it continued till they were defeated by Alauddin Khilji. But before that, they were defeated by Chauhans, and then they were defeated by Gauri. You see, a whole lot of history happened. But this is just a kind of broad outline of what was going on in that area. Dhara was famous throughout India as a center of cultural learning, especially under King Bhoj. And King Bhoj was a very an expert in Indian classical architecture. And the book Vastu Shastra, which is now considered the basic book of architect for architect from the health and environmental point of view, this is being used now without giving credit to who created it. As if Vastu Shastra is one of the things you brought, maybe Michelangelo. So the architect should be well versed. These are the qualifications he mentioned. The architect was known as Satabdi. Under him, there were masons and other, people. They were making blueprints, and they used the logs made of stone and wedged them inside. So a whole lot of craftsmanship, carving, and etching, and lattice work. These were developed, guidelines were developed by in the Vastu Shastra. At a later stage, probably I'll show you that in America, in Iowa, the Vedic city, started by Mahesh Yogi, and their main central hall is based on Vastu Shastra. And their meditation hall is also based on Vastu Shastra. So it is not that it is not being used, it is. With these expectations, compare what was happening in Europe at that time. Hmm? So then Ayurveda was making strides. It was practiced everywhere, though not mentioned in every dynasty, but it was the basic medicinal system and surgery. In fact, Will Durant mentioned that they use the herbs, and those herbs were like anesthesia. So they burnt the herb, and the person who smelled it, it had a effect of putting him to sleep. So that was called sammohini, like doing some kind of magical thing. It was actually worked as anesthetic. And there is a legend that the King Bhoja, he had a tumor in his brain, and they with a wire they cut the head, removed the tumor while he was still under that, and attached it again. Such was the efficiency and expertise in surgery, how to cut the head into parts and remove. That means instruments were also there. And special kind of threads were there. Actually, when we go to discuss the history of medicine and surgery in a later session, I'll show you the slides of those instruments and the threads they used for stitching back the amputated part. And they say that this was done. And also, they used sterilization. That is the same thing like Havan Kund that we use today. And they used in that room prior to bringing the patient there, 2 days before. So, in other words, fumigating that all the germs are killed. So, these precautions were taken. So, anybody who says that germ theory was invented in Europe and later on the Harvey discovered what was that? That blood circulates. Unless you know blood circulates, you cannot do the surgery. So blood circulates. We are not having a stagnant pool. It circulates. So these kind of small little things you have to see in the broader scale and highlight them. If we don't highlight India's heritage and the greatest of discoveries and marvels that they discovered or created with herbs and medicines, who will then do it if we don't do it? So this is my expectation that down the line, these kind of highlights are used to be proud of your heritage and to reclaim not only the chronology, the antiquity of Indian civilization, but the marvels of Indian civilization and philosophy of Indian civilization. So architecture, Dhara pillar, this pillar is considered the highest iron pillar of those times. And this is a person who visited the place. And he mentioned, on the bottom is a square and then octagonal part. And it has a very skillful kind of structure. So this is the Paramars. Now you see, this is where Pratiharas were. And this is where Paramars. And Pratiharas are still there. I mean, at this time. So they are contemporaneous, in other words. Gradually, this Pala dynasty started coming this way and reached right up to Kannauj. And that became another begin. So you can understand, everybody can understand the fact that how many people are vying for control. There are Paramaras, there are Pratiharas, there are Palas, there are Rashtrakutas, Chalukyas, Cholas, and they are fighting among themselves for suzerainty and sovereignty, and who is mightier than the other, or more chivalrous and cavalier and kind of thing, instead of uniting. So this is the temple in Udaipur. Is that? Let's see the next one. Yes, this is the panel of the temple that I just showed. I mean, how intricate it is. So it needs some maintenance. And now see, the heads are cut off here, or an arm is missing somewhere. And why is that? This is vandalization. It is not because of the environmental factors or rainfall or something like that. No, it is decidedly, it is a cut off. Here the head is cut off. The Muslims believed that infidels, if their head is cut off, then their body is of no use. Of course, of course, you sever the head, the person dies. And they thought that by doing this to the temples and architecture, and they are severing the infidels themselves. So these kind of notions. Now, Connaught Triangle, this is what is going on. This is the contemporaneous situation. The Rashtrakutas are, this is Malwa, and there is Jan, Paramars, and at the west, Paramars reached there. And Palas, when they were at the height, they reached up to Kannauj. Pratiharas were still there at the periphery. Part of Pratihara region, Paramars took. So this map shows the whole line fluidity and changing of boundaries. Finally, Paramars was settled, accepted that beyond Narbada, they cannot go down. So they accepted this is their boundary. And up there, it was still very challenging situation. So, with dharmic practices, royal patronage, I already explained coexistence. If Jain temples are made, the Shiva temple was made, Vishnu temple was made. So during this period, the Zoroastrians came. There is another interesting thing that the Muslims or Arabs were, and Turkish also, tribes, they were destroying by Parsis, and it was known as Persia at that time, and other parts of Iran. So the persecuted Zoroastrians, they started pouring in from that area to India. This added another dharmic tradition to the tapestry of India. Already we had Buddhist practices, and Buddhists started believing in Tantra, which was a Hindu and meditational book assigned to Bhairav. But they also started believing in that. So, and they started taking it. Gradually, the Buddhist and the Hindu traditions came so close to each other that it was like parallel to common belief. And the second time, this friction of nonsense of ahimsa came, that was when Gandhi brought this nonsense into the as part of Indian culture and Rajya. So, a seal bearing the impression of Vara. Vara is boar, and we talked about it in lessons on Hindu symbolism. And so, and anybody who says that Raja Bhoj was Hindu and Nagabhatta was Buddhist is total nonsense. There was no friction. Nobody destroyed each other's tradition, attacked. There used to be councils and philosophic debates, but that is how it should be. Instead of fighting with swords, it is better to fight with tongue and bring out your best logic and make a claim to a certain hypothesis or a certain belief. So King Bhoj, achievements in literature, it's already mentioned. Raj Shekhar, several books he wrote. Now, this is interesting. I also was not very familiar with this. I knew the name. In between, after Ghazni's ransacking, his soldiers converted many of the tribes into Muslim faith. And now that Ghazni was gone, and the next invasions came in small doses here and there, so influx was not as devastating, and those converted people wanted to come back. So now the Hindus were thinking, how do we purify them? So, and then Deval Samriti was written, just like Manu Samriti guidelines of social behavior and dharmic behavior. Similarly, Deval Samriti was written at that time, and he suggested, have a yajna, purify, uh, have a bath in the Ganges, and the entire thing. And that was Deval Samriti. So legends about King Bhoja. This is Bhoja of Paramars, the one who wrote the Vastu Shastra. He is considered to be one of the greatest kings. There are so many legends about and sayings about King Bhoja. More than historical narrative, legends are there. For example, King Bhoja once went incognito at night and he was thirsty. So he saw a small cottage and some women were there. He wanted water. And they asked that first you answer our question. And Bhoja was thirsty. He said, you asked. They said, who are you? And Bhoja said, I am a tourist. And in Hindi, the word is pathik. And they said that pathik are only two. One is moon, the other is sun. So tell us exactly. And this continued for quite a few question answers. And the same legend is linked to Aryabhat, not Arya, Kalidas. So we don't know which legend belonged to. But one of them saying, they say, Kahan Ganga, Kahan Raja Bhoj, or Kahan Gangu Teli. So that is this Bhoj. And there is a legend about Gangu Teli also. So there are a lot of them. You can find if you read any book on King Bhoja and about this king is responsible for Bhojpur temple and he is also responsible. His name is used for Bhopal airport. So now Pala dynasty, very briefly. So when the Magad became like a very little chieftain, then from the east came the Palas, from east and south. So there was anarchy in Bengal and Magad. So Palas, they expanded. So Dharampala expanded his kingdom, and it is contemporaneous. Again, you see the same time block. A short period of time he controlled Kannauj, the capital of the Pratiharas. Pratiharas gained it back. So you see the fluidity. Palas go to Kannauj, and the Pratiharas kingdom shrink, and they gain back. And so that fluidity continued. And that is why the border lines of these, this triangular kingdoms, remained chaotic. All the military action or a show of chivalry was shown on the borders. So there was a turmoil and confusion and chaos. Then there was his descendant Devapala, and then Rampala, and the dynasty continued for about 100 years, more than 100 years, up to uh, 11th century. So about 300 years. So Rampala was great administrator. He was also the writer, a hero. And about him, books were written. They were supporters of Buddhism. And they sent missionaries from the kingdom, their kingdom, to Tibet, and established Buddhism in Tibet. And Palas brought in several different schools of art. And they created sculpture, metal, and everything. I mean, these details show the intricacies of metallurgy, advancement in metallurgy. And this is a Panchadhatu kind of thing where many alloys are used. So you can understand that this is mm, this kind of metallurgical techniques. They were far more ancient in India than they came in the industrialization, with the industrialization in the West. So how to make alloys, how to isolate iron sulfate, all of this. So this is one of the murtis. The other one was Buddha, and this is mm, Vishnu with his two consorts, Lakshmi and Bhumi. And then, and this is my favorite, this is the Shank, and look at the carving on the Shank. I looked at it and I thought it was made of ivory. But Shank is also a natural formation of minerals, combination of minerals. And how they did it, I mean, such a small scale of the king here also. So if we enlarge it, you can see the intricacies of that, the lattice work, the carving, the base, the proportions. So it is really marvelous. We should be really proud of those people and proud of our heritage. If we have an iota of understanding of those things, it's because that somebody created those things. We are merely trying to understand and showcase our heritage. So crimes against a new type of enemy has come now. I'm just highlighting that the situation will never be the same. This part of history, ancient Indian history, finishes at 1000. and the sultanates and the brutalities and gaining Delhi and other parts of northern India. I'm not going to cover that. So this is the last of the uh, dynasty in northern India. So the crimes against Hindus, women and children abducted, sold in the Middle East. Men were killed, converted, used for menial work. Raids by these tribes, invasions, it became part of the political scene. But the core fabric, the core of the cultural ethos and social institutional structure was not damaged. So some norms had to be laid down to reabsorb, and I mentioned Deval stability. And continual Arab invasions, time and again, they did not give up. 9th century leadership of Bashar attempted another invasion, and Nagavat subdued them. But they continued. And finally, after the defeat of naval expedition, uh, it is said that the Caliph, he gave up. So these were Turkish expeditions in India, incursions. And he said that we cannot do it. Of course, 10 years later, they continued. So Turkish and Arab invasion, new type of enemy, nomadic tribes. They were hungry and starved of resources for survival. They were barbaric and brutal on the name of God. Fighting was the only accomplishment they had. How to kill, how to torture, and be happy about it. Hmm? Determined and fearless. And their motto was capture what they can, contest what they cannot, and punish those who resist. And this is what is going on even today. If you can get it very nicely as a gift from the Indian government, that is good. If you are not getting it, then you have some kind of dharnas and sit down strike and blocking the road or vandalism or protest, contest. And then, if anybody interferes, you punish them, kill them, patarbaz. So, the more the time advances, more likely we stay the same. We have the same enemies, we have the same strategy of the enemy, and we are still the same unprepared people who do not know how to survive. So if you think that these lessons are irrelevant, they are not. So in fact, Cullen mentions that they approached the king and sent ambassadors to China also to help these people to cut off uh, or fight for with them to stop the Arab invasions. It did not happen. Kashmir itself became a victim. So what was Europe like in that? We are talking about the heritage up to 10th, 11th century. What was Europe like? You know, who is describing us or uh, fixing a narrative around us, describing us, telling us this is your history, not what you can see with your own eyes. Who said that happening? In the European history, this period is called 7th to 15th century, 13th century. 7th to 13th century, the period is called Dark Ages. That means there was no civilization developments or any new discoveries and stuff. The age of superstition and hearsay. So, and we are talking in the classrooms in America, we are talking about 6 civilizations. Three of them are these: Egypt, Mali. Where are they? Rome, Greece, China. So these are the six uh, Maya and Aztec. Where are those civilizations today? And if they were short-lived, 200 years, 300 years, 500 years, then why we are talking about them? Why don't we talk about the only civilization, the only survivable philosophy, environmentalism, based on environmentalism and cosmic law? Why are we talking about Egypt, Mali, and for 3 months we are talking about mummies? What about mummies and pyramids? What about them? They are dead and gone. So Arabian desert and the river valleys, we are talking, what is the conditions of it? Some trade was going on with Sumeria and Babylonia and Mitannis, but other parts were deserts. And these are deserts, nomads from desert who came. So history books taught in India teach that the invaders brought civilization and the British modernized and civilized India. Now, to counter this narrative, we haven't done it. I wrote the book in 2010, which was totally ignored by the Indian uh, Council of Historical Research. Not even bothered to review it. And I gave them the challenge that if there is any kind of mistake or historical inaccuracy, please add to it. It is easier to add or subtract or delete something which is to you not proven or no evidence or whatever. Nobody has done that. They're still figuring out. And crores of rupees have been given to them in grants for the last 75 years. Still no book. And I'm revising it. Okay. Now, this is the important. Somebody asked me a question. Actually, not somebody. Many people are asking me these questions. If Hindu civilization was that great, that powerful, that creative, and that accomplished, what went wrong? That we were subjugated by small little nomadic sultanates and the Mughal and the British. What went wrong? And where did it go wrong? And is it being corrected or is it still going wrong? So these are the fundamental issues that we have to deal with. What happened? Okay. Very well done. Okay. Uh, anyway, this makes us revise the session. Okay. So conclusions and some observations. These are my conclusions and my observations. That doesn't mean that you cannot add. You should. Because with the political fall of different democracies and different powers in Europe, Europe is already in decline. Mm, we really have to figure out that we stay and survive. So how did the Arab invasions affect the socio-political scene of Central India? Socio-political scene. They made and they annihilated, they vandalized, they tried to remove the evidence and then replace it with assumptions and mythical notions. Probably, in Encyclopedia Britannica, you will find Indian section. Probably they were. Why be probable? If there is an evidence, why are you talking about an assumption or guesswork? So, what are the lessons we can learn from the history of this period? What does the current geopolitical situation indicate? We are exactly where we were 1,000 years back. That is what it is. So, where are the fault lines? Do they still exist? People are talking about Akhand Bharat and unification of the entire subcontinent. That is not going to happen and should not be happening because the demography of those areas is total Muslim. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Iraq. They are all Muslims. Absorbing them, then Hindus are in minority at the mercy of the majority. So please forget the idea and the lofty talk about, let us restore, rejuvenate, and make it a Akhand Bharat. It is a dream, impossible to achieve, not grounded in reality, will never happen and should never happen. So, philosophy. In one of the discussions, it came up that S.R. Goel, a very renowned scholar, um, publisher of Voice of India publications, um, he gave a very good one-page narrative that what is going on, right? And where are the fault lines? So that page should be read. And Rajiv Verma, he put it on the group's chat. So my take is philosophy itself, peaceful coexistence. Peaceful coexistence is between people if everybody believes in peaceful coexistence. Even the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, if they are not, one of them is not peaceful, they cannot have peaceful coexistence. So, talking about this kind of nonsense, Panchasheel and peaceful coexistence, non-aligned, bogus ideas, useless rhetoric, tolerance. Why tolerate? Something is wrong. Bharat's lesson is if something is wrong, do something about it and kill it. Where is the killer instinct? Where is the killer instinct? So, social outlook. Now, our outlook, our maryada and sanskar, what do they say? Don't hit anybody. If somebody has a fight, a street fight between, small children, they always fight. We did too. And when we came home and explained that, there was abusive words used and we hit each other, and our parents scolded us without asking who started it first and what. So from childhood, we are groomed that way. Thou shalt not hit anybody. Why not? So right from the beginning, this cultural orientation has to change. A psychological mindset. We have to develop a killer instinct. Ants have a killer instinct. They have a strategy if they find an enemy. Why not we? We, with our highly developed brain and mind, why would we are not able to, destroy something? Okay. So social outlook is responsible, our sanskar, social behavior. And somebody does a grievous hurt to you and you let bygones be bygones. Why? Aren't we going to learn lessons from that? Shouldn't we? Okay. Then Parsis, now, Here are the Parsis. Parsis, Zoroastrians, when they came, they assimilated in Indian society. They never asked for minority rights and they never asked for any special privilege. And the story, if I didn't tell before, is that when Parsis arrived in Malwa, the king asked, we already have so many people from foreign countries, and our cup of milk is up to the brim, filled up to the brim. And Parsi said, then if we add a spoonful of sugar, it will become sweet and palatable. And Parsis were allowed. Until this day, they have unquestionable loyalty to the country. So this is the difference between this group and Jews are the same way. They were skewed when they were attacked uh, the by the Muslims. They came to India. So abundant resources are there. It always attracts. So nobody goes to poor person's house to ransack it. And internecine warfare, well, is another thing. Still going on. Not a single culprit of the Congress time has been put behind the bars. What's wrong with this scenario? I mean, this should be the main thesis for somebody to write. Threadbare. That why we are not able to unite? Why do they not overcome this kind of nonsensical and allow the political criminals, looters, to stay within the country and not behind the bars? You see, a system which allows this kind of injustice must be replaced. So, an influence of Jain and Buddhist faith traditions, that is there because ahimsa, and austerity. If you are fasting all the time, where is the strength to fight? Pessimism. So, when you are unable to fight or you give up, then you say that spirituality, self-abnegation, austerity, and pessimism. What can we do? In Punjabi, there is a saying that somebody was killed the whole people were killed in the train, and the woman waiting at the railway station in Ludhiana said, that what zamana kat pale din avange. In Punjabi, it's a very brief, ornamental kind of language. That what means that ignore it and keep living. The manakat means, live your life and believe that some good days will come later on. That should not, and this is recent, very recent. And again, cowardice is not spirituality. So any bhakta of Gandhi should get rid of this nonsense first. In fact, the ghost of Gandhi should be gotten rid of. These are my fault lines that I think of. But if you have many more, please add on to it. And ask other people to take up each of these issues. Why we lost the killer instinct and how to build it. And how to overcome some of the outlook. Retaliation is necessary and justified. So, and then This self-abnegation does not mean that you ignore the enemy. What do you do if the ant walks on the arm? You remove it or kill it. You go like this. It is not that let it bite me, it is self-abnegation. And even in Punjab, during those times, up to 15th, 16th, 17th century, 17th, 14th, 15th, 16th century, was known as in entire northern India the Bhakti period. Hmm. In order to avoid the challenges, the best thing is Bhakti. Hmm. Think about your own austerities and karmas, close the eyes and meditate. And all the gurus also did not fight for identity. They did not fight for freedom or for that. They were focusing on bhakti. They were philosophers, practical thinkers. They produced wisdom literature. It was only the last Guruji, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, he became a warrior, scholar, philosopher, warrior, everything. And that is when he realized that we should create a militia. And sometimes the militia itself loses its destination and forgets the plot, why they exist. And they attack the very people who they were meant to protect. These are small things, but put together, it becomes a giant mountain to climb and to somehow surmount. So, having said that, and this lesson is over. Thank you very much and namaste. If you have any question,